I'd like to welcome you to another program in our noon lecture series. Today's guest is the second in our series of candidates for the California governorship. He hasn't come here in that manner, but I'm sure he'll field questions on the governorship if you'd like to pose them. You all know Dick Enberg is not only the announcer for the UCLA Bruins basketball team, but the Los Angeles Angels and the Los Angeles Rams baseball and football teams respectively. He's from the Midwest, but he's been able to shake the Midwest announcing bias of Mike Walden and become a pretty top sportscaster. And I think that we should be able to have a pretty good rap session with a gentleman who, believe it or not, has a PhD in health sciences. I'd like to introduce to you now Dr. Dick Enberg.
Thank you. They said that you're all loaded up and ready to fire, so...
One question we'd probably all be interested in is the trend of former athletes going into the broadcasting business going to continue. Now, it's been shown a lot of them seem to be quite, incompetent, but they still, still are able to get in there. And it seems like the trend today is to be a former athlete, to be black, and to be able to speak well, and that just seems to be the necessary qualification. Will that continue?
Can you hear the questions, or should I restate them? Can you hear them back there? The question basically was, is the trend going to continue where basically former athletes move into sports broadcasting positions because of their athletic background, maybe appealing in looks and name because of their athletic talent, become then sportscasters? We'd like to think not, that that would be the only basis. The reason why there has been this trend is that on Madison Avenue, when it's time for them to sell a sports package, and let's just play for instance, let's say that no one has a sports team identification next football season, so now they can pick anyone they want. And it boils down to Dick Enberg or Joe Namath, or let's not even use Namath, or any sports name. Namath, I'm trying to think of, might even be a second string guard with the New York Jets. The likely is that if this guy has any name at all, that for those people in New York who then have to go out and sell the New York Jets package, it's going to be easier to sell them than a name on the West Coast, even though I may have more qualifications, that no one knows in the East. That is the basic reason. They like to get a good, solid announcer and then back him up with a well-known name. And some of these ex-athletes have done an outstanding job. I was flattered recently when Bill McPhail, who is the CBS sports director, said that 3 years ago they had mapped out potential pro football broadcasting teams. And he had linked my name with Pat Summerall's, and I think Pat is one of the fine announcers. Even if he had not played at all, I think he has made it as an announcer. I think Gifford has come a long way from the man we first heard 7, 8 years ago. But basically, I think it's a bad trend, and I think that the broadcasting industry recognizes that. But it all comes down to dollars and cents again, and who will sell and who won't. And if you're Ken Harrelson, you're going to sell more than perhaps any baseball announcer in the game today. Let's spread it around, and let's yes.
Why did the Bruins lose last week?
Well, I think basically lack of points. Pat Paulson gave me that line. They were outplayed, I thought. I think Coach Wooden agreed. I think that the players, some of them might agree that they had gotten into a pattern whereby even sometimes when they didn't play well, they still won the game, and that develops bad habits maybe. And I think it was refreshing for them to realize after the game that they are not unbeatable, and I believe it'll be good therapy down the stretch where it really counts. It was last year, wasn't it?
Are you planning on singing for us Friday night against SC?
Am I planning on singing for you Friday night against SC? I have made that promise. If your team can win the Pacific 8 title, I will sing for you after the game. That way, at least on television, it'll be 1 o'clock, and anyone crazy crazy enough to stay up that late then deserves to hear it. And my wife has not allowed me. I'm trying to get a tape recorder into the game tonight to tape Kelly James Band when they play Raindrops because I'd like to at least practice a couple of times. She claims that if she has anything to do with it, she won't. As long as my big mouth got me into this jam, then I can be as bad as I'll be without practicing. But I will as soon as they clinch it. Now, see, if SC could come on here a little bit and make things closer, then, see, I don't do the last game. That's Channel 11's game. In fact, I'll be in Palm Springs for the first baseball broadcast. So the Bruins will have to clinch it in the next 3 games, or maybe I don't know. How else could I possibly sing? I could do it down there and really cuss. Yes.
Do you think basketball generally is better in the Midwest than it is in the West Coast?
No, I really don't think so. I thought so when I was there, but we all tend to become rather provincial. I think that at one time it was with the fine talents and basketball. The feeling you get in the Midwest toward basketball is much stronger than you get here because we have many more diversions. There, what else can you do in Bloomington, Indiana during the winter? You know, I mean, in terms of athletic interests, and that the kids do. Basketball is the sport, the only sport from November through the tournaments. And I don't know if you all got the story, but when Jim Bush's track and field team won the NCAA, when was that, 66, 67? It was in Indianapolis, no, it was at Bloomington, at the campus where I attended, Indiana University. They won the NCAA, so Sunday morning in the newspaper, they can't wait to get the Indianapolis newspapers to see, you know, how they've been heralded as the nation's top track and field team. I believe it was like on the 4th or 5th page the story appeared. The first 2 or 3, now this is June, were taken up by the Kentucky-Indiana High School All-Star basketball game. Now, this is in June, and that's really the interest. The performances are not any better than they are here, and I think that top to bottom, the Pacific 8 is the best basketball conference in the country. Yes, way back there.
Which is harder to do, baseball or football and television or radio?
Which is harder to do, baseball, football, television, or radio? Television automatically makes things easier because the picture helps you to tell a story. You can omit information and the picture will support you. I think we tend to talk too much, and I'm guilty of that, as almost every announcer is. I don't like the trend, if I might digress here a moment, I don't like the trend where television announcers are becoming no more than basic informers. Wicks, 2 points, UCLA, Washington. I'd like to get a little more information than that. And I think the trend has been, and newspapermen, if you have noticed, have supported that very basic approach. Well, gee, you can make an awfully exciting game rather drab by not feeling the excitement of the ball game. And maybe I'm too emotional in that regard, but I refuse to go in that direction. But back to your point. Baseball is the toughest there is. I always thought it was, and now I know. Most of the 2.5, 3 hours you're on the air, there is little action. So you have to fill in those long, dry periods. Football, I think, dramatically, far and away, is the most exciting game to broadcast, especially on radio, because you have enough action that carries you, and yet you're presented with that delightful 20 to 30-second period between plays where you can bring in a personal touch, you can set the scene, you can build some drama. Basketball, hockey are so fast that I'll have a page full of ad libs that I want to get in during a UCLA game, and I can't get them in even on television because there aren't that many delays in the game. Baseball, you know, I need an encyclopedia just to get through the 3rd inning. And in fact, at the end of the last baseball season, where our team was not doing that well, I realized that people who would, and there are many people who use baseball as a pacifier. I'm that way. I'll be on the freeway, and before I started calling the games, even though the Angels or the Dodgers may have been way out of it, I would still tune in and listen to the baseball game, and Scully or Blattner or Wells or Doggett were my companions on the way home. I just enjoyed being entertained. Well, at the end of the year, the last 2 months of the season, when obviously the Angels were not going to do anything, they might finish in vacant 3rd place, which they did, which was kind of an empty finish. For the first time, it was a good training because for the first time in my life, I actually looked through the newspaper from front to back because if there was a good recipe, I'd pull that out, a little joke, funny guy in a bathtub going to cross Lake Michigan, and I figured, now those are all things I can use in the broadcast because I think we become entertainers. Anyone that's going to be with you after your team obviously is out of the race wants to be entertained, and if the baseball game itself is not entertaining, then you have to rely on other crutches. Basketball, hockey, you don't have the time. Football, just right. Baseball, too much time. So I would say, in my own opinion, football is the most fun to call. I don't think necessarily it's the easiest. It all depends, I guess, on your background and so forth. But baseball was miserably tough last year. Yes.
An All-American team picked out this year.
Do I have an All-American basketball team picked out? Hadn't really thought about that. I did have the chance, as many of you did, to make the comparison between Dan Issel and one of our players, Dan Issel, the All-American, who was an All-American last year, and obviously because he was last year, will be again this year, and he scored a lot of points, which again almost assures that. But I surely wouldn't take him over Sid Wicks. I was sitting with Bob Boyd watching the game. The USC team had not left the hotel. We stayed in the same place in Eugene, and I just happened to wander in, and he was there watching the game, so I sat down, and Boyd had some very complimentary things to say about Wicks. And as he watched Issel, made me feel good because it was the same reaction I was having, that Issel has a lot of fine moves, good shooter, 6'8", strong, so forth, but is not blessed with the quickness of Sidney Wicks. And on a one-on-one, you'd have to be crazy to ever pick Issel over Wicks. But Wicks is only scoring 18 points a game on an average, and when they look at that in the East, that makes him automatically second or third team. Issel will probably get it over Wicks because he's averaging more around 30 points a game. But let's hope they have a chance to meet head-on a little bit later down the line. Yes?
Why is this, what do you think the reason for the difference between West Coast and East Coast announcers came about, where the West Coast, except for Chick Hearn last year, to try and get fairly objective, and in the East, a Philadelphia announcer is not going to say one good thing about anybody else, or he'll be fired.
Well, I guess it boils down to what is really good reporting or not. I'd like to think that it's all Scully's fault, right? I mean that serious. It's Scully's fault. He is the best baseball announcer ever, as far as I'm concerned, and maybe the best sports reporter ever. He, without showing his bias, he has one, as I do, and we all do. You can't broadcast a team's games and not want them to win. That's only natural. But he's been able to make baseball entertaining. He's been able to educate people to enjoy the game more. He's given the information as a good reporter should, and yet has a delightful personality that just kind of throws mortar in between all those other things and builds a... At times I wonder if he doesn't write some of that poetry before he goes on the air, because he actually speaks so beautifully at times. So I think he has shown that you don't have to be biased to do a good job of sports reporting, and I find myself challenged by that. I would never have called the games the way I do now when I did the Indiana games in the Big Ten. There was no question about, you gave credit to the other team, sure, but you called the bad calls right with the crowd, and you were a member of the crowd. And I'd like to think that maybe we're just a little more sophisticated out here. We have that isn't really true, but what is true is that about 20% of your audience, because of the migrant nature of Los Angeles and Southern California, about 20% of your audience really is not rooting for your team. About 20% don't want UCLA to win, maybe more because they've been on top and it's natural to root for the underdog. About 20% of the Angel audience want the Indians to win, or if we're playing the Tigers, want them to win. Same with the Dodgers, same with the Rams. You go to the Coliseum, and although there's the feeling the Rams are the home team, there's still plenty of applause for the other team when they do well. So you're insulting that 20% whenever you become that biased in your own reporting, and it's been the toughest thing for me to face, and I'm not sure I've accomplished it yet. The only feedback I get that supports maybe that I'm hitting a happy medium is, for example, the Oregon game. I got a lot of mail. I made one very unfortunate comment that I thought was innocent at the moment, but apparently was not. It's split down the middle that a lot of them think that I should go up and call the Oregon games because I like the Ducks so much, and there is another equal number of letters who say, "You Bruin honk," you've just gone. So I guess maybe I'm somewhere in between. May I just get a quick reaction, because I was just shocked, stunned by the feedback I got on the one comment I made. To reset the scene, there's 10,500 people in a place that should have about 8,000, and they were obviously excited, and justifiably so. That will be the social highlight of the year in Eugene. The people, we were right in the middle, about in the same position we are here at Pauley Pavilion, only there isn't a separation between the lower deck and the upper balcony. It's all one level. So anytime the student body stands up here, I can still see, but when they stood up there, then I had to stand up where I couldn't see. The adult section behind me, and of course they're as vocal as the students, and for some reason the adults could not understand why I had to stand up. I think one of the reasons was they knew that I was a foreigner. I was from Los Angeles, and they were going to give it to me anyway. But I'd stand up, and they'd start shouting, "Sit down." So it's a little tough on the concentration. You've got all the noise anyway, and now you've got people behind you saying, "Sit down," and you can't see, and you have a job to do. Well, finally, one of them, during the peak of excitement in the second half, when it appeared that Oregon, after Blair, hit that unconscious hook shot, and they were on their way. See, those are words you'd love to say at the time. You can't say it, Now, in the Midwest, you could say that, but you can't. Finally, at the peak of all this excitement, this one character is coming down, and he's hitting me physically in the back, saying, sit down," and hitting me, and I'm trying to give him a stand love, but so it was at that moment I made the comment, "I feel as welcome here as a Jew in Cairo." Well, that was really, it was no more than to express, it was an unfortunate simile, but express really how lonely I felt at the moment. I was not taking a stand. If you really analyze it at all, it shows empathy toward the Jew. But the Jewish reaction to this has been so incredible, including a Valley State professor who had 400 students ready to picket KTLA, and threats on my life and the whole works. And I can't. I hope that I would like to come on and say something tonight during the telecast, but the station said no. We can't. I said I could say, I'd give equal time. I feel like a Arab in Tel Aviv, but it was no more than an innocent remark, and the overreaction to it, I guess, really is a sign of the times. It was an innocent one, and I can only tell you people that it meant no more than that. And if any of you reacted, I apologize if I have harmed or hurt you or your loved ones. But it was anything beyond trying to describe the maniacal situation in which I was thrown into. I felt very lonely at the time, and anything more than that were in the eyes of the viewer. Yes.
What do you think of Chick Hearn's technique?
Chick is, I think, probably, as the gentleman in the back said earlier, probably comes as close to the Midwestern or Eastern approach to calling a game. I think he gets more into a basketball radio broadcast than any human being could. I marvel at how he can speak so rapidly, be able to get so much pertinent information in between bounces of the dribble, and still, get all the score right and the players' names right and all the things that we just hope to, we normal people hope to get. I marvel at his talent. I think he's a great basketball announcer. I think he's the kind of guy, and some of this is affectation. He knows what he's doing, and some of the feedback you get to people who don't like that is almost as rewarding as is much more rewarding than if no one comments at all. And so I think that he has not hurt his audience a bit by his technique, by his being emotional, pro-Laker, coaching a little bit, refereeing a little bit. I'd like to do that too. I kind of envy him, but Coach wouldn't say he'd rather I wouldn't try that technique. Yes.
Will there be any differences in officiating between Pacific 8 play and in the finals in College Park, Maryland? And if so, how will it affect UCLA's style of play?
The feeling I get from the players, the UCLA players, is that they felt that the best officiating they've had recently was in the East at the Garden for the tournament last year. And I get the feeling, I can't defend it at all, that the Eastern group of officials are better qualified. I honestly believe.
More lenient or what?
No, I don't know. The question, are they more lenient? I just think they're more competent. I really believe, genuinely, that we have some officials in the Pacific Gate that are not competent. I'm not questioning their integrity. I know when you get out, it's got to be tough. And any man who would want to be an official in the first place is suspect. And why would you want to take that abuse? But there are some officials that just aren't very good. There's some very good also. But in the East, maybe it's just that it's more of an attraction to be an official and more prestige, maybe more money. I don't know. But it's kind of sad to see that there are so few young officials coming up. And the high schools and junior college games, it doesn't appear that they're, I'm talking with coaches, that it doesn't seem much better there. And that the same old officials are getting older, and they're just, many of them are not even quick enough to get down to be in position to make the call. And there were some, kind of incredible things that happened. Now again, the emotions of the moment played a part in the Oregon game. But now here again, I had to bite my tongue because Wicks is breaking down court, and Stan Love, from behind, just the way he did when you were a kid, just reached out and tried to hook him with his foot, tried to trip him out there in front of God and everybody. Well, how could that not be called? Even the Oregon people kind of said, and when they realized you could get away with that, it was Katie bar the door, and that it just shouldn't happen. Mr. Soriano was right on the baseline at the time. A very key play. It was a 4-point play. I think it was about 7-point difference at the time, and one of the UCLA players had made a steal and kind of bounced the ball toward midcourt. And Holliday had moved in front, made a fine play, and batted it toward their end of the court. And then Holliday raced down and did a little pirouette on the baseline and controlled the ball, dribbled it once, 3 feet out of bounds, took it in, and the play continued the other way, and the official standing right on the spot. Well, there again, we're just like the crowd as if to say, well, if I blew the whistle, they wouldn't hear it anyway. And see, I'm glad I've had this chance because I'm getting all this out now tonight. I could be very cool and try to be unbiased tonight. Maybe some of the people in the back here I've ignored. Yes. John Hall, I voted for him as the best sports writer in town. I know that he, like almost all sports writers in town, are USC graduates or have been aligned with the Trojans, and that makes it tough. And I know when he wrote 3 straight articles about UCLA and their coach and players that had to be a little tough to digest. But John Hall is, believe me, a very sensitive, very warm, the kind of guy that you'd like to know. And I think that as far as the writers in this town, presenting a palatable column each day, being able to get a little more out of any story, that John Hall is a highly qualified newspaper man. Just maybe you ought to bring him here sometime. I think you'd enjoy him. Yes.
Is there continuing friction between Coach Allen and Dan Reeves?
Is there continuing friction between Coach George Allen and Dan Reeves? This would have to be off the record. I think that their problems will never be totally resolved. Dan Reeves has a couple of ways to go, and this is going to be a very interesting year. Mr. Allen is on the last year of a 5-year contract. Owner Reeves, whom I would like to say, of all the people I've met as a teacher, as a student, as a broadcaster, and the other relationships a person would have, I have never admired an administrator, a person in an administrative capacity, more than Dan Reeves. He is a brilliant man, a highly sensitive man, and anyone who has ever worked with him closely, if you're to judge the parent by the son, then this is an incredible man. I mean, the people that have worked under him, Pete Rozelle, Tex Small, Tex Schramm, I mean, just people who are now the strength of the National Football League. So my feelings were very much with Mr. Reeves when the break came a year ago. I was not surprised a bit that he fired George Allen, although most of this city was surprised. I was amazed that he rehired them, and I guess that's a commentary No one understands that yet, other than I think that was just public reaction that Mr. Reeves feels that he did bring this team here, and if this city felt that strongly, then he would keep Coach Allen. I think it's to his great credit that at no time during all that mess did Dan Reeves ever say why. He just said personal reasons, whereas the other party immediately attacked Mr. Reeves on a personal basis. And if the story were ever told, I think Dan Reeves would have gotten much more support. But he didn't want support. He wanted to do what was right for his feelings, his own integrity. But anyway, to get the point, he's got two choices. He can either fire Allen again or sell the ball club. And I think it'll be one or the other in this next year. Yes.
So professional baseball is obviously a big business. There's a great deal of speculation going on, and the Seattle owners tend to make $3 million to take the money and run. And yet the owners insist that baseball can't be treated as a business, it's with other businesses are treated as businesses. How can it really be justified when they're trying to exploit the city of Seattle for a really quick and very large personal gain?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question. I'm not sure they're exploiting the city of Seattle. In fact, I think that they would like very much not to be in Seattle this year, but had no choice. They're trying to show that they'll give them another chance, but it's a lame duck year. There's Seattle, I just don't see how they possibly can support a major league team under the circumstances there, and that they'll try this year. They're giving them a chance to show, but it would be a miracle if Seattle can offer indication that they should keep a franchise there. It's obviously a very involved issue, and one of the reasons why Seattle was in and then out and then in again, and the Curt Flood thing going now, is that baseball is very much concerned about antitrust legislation. I don't know. That's an area that I don't know much about, and I think you could argue all day and pick your side and go on it. The only thing I could answer specifically to is that I think Seattle, this is its last year, and that will go somewhere else. It's unfortunate. They really should. Logic would indicate that they should go somewhere else now, but baseball is saying, well, we can't afford that because that's more bad publicity, and with the Curt Flood thing and everything else, so we better at least keep that part quiet because it got into a political situation in Washington, and they wanted to throw a little water on that. But Seattle has a lot of this to blame upon itself. They've handled things poorly. Yes.
What do you think about Chris Schenkel and Bud Wilkinson, that type of announcing? I mean, why would he be so popular? I
Well,
just can't. He always seems to be off the subject on sports. He'll do anything but talk about the big play. He'll talk about the girl on the sideline or something.
Well, yeah, that may be why he's so very popular. It's tough, I'm sure, at that level to satisfy all. I think that one of the hazards of a fellow like Gowdy or Schenkel, who have the network jobs, who are being bounced around, and they're in France doing a ski tournament one day and flying to do a bowling tournament in Akron, Ohio the next day, and is that they get spread so thin that they really don't have the information on the players and the teams that they used to have when Schenkel used to be the Giants announcer. I really, myself, Chris, is a fine person also, and I like very much as a person. But I don't think he's nearly the announcer he used to be when he did the Giants games, and maybe some of you are from New York and would recall him as their play-by-play announcer there. I think that's part of the problem. They just there's so much, they're being pushed to do so many things that there isn't time to do all your homework. And I feel blessed so far. I know that I could fool 90% of my audience by not being prepared, but I worry about that 10%, and I'm one of the 10%, and I don't think I could ever fool myself, and I hope I don't fall into that trap. It's easy to have happen. You start to relax and things seem to be going well, and you say, well, I just won't do quite so much work this time. But I think that's part of the problem. It's not that they don't have the talent. The times when you might get upset with them, it's just it's the fact that maybe they got 2 hours sleep the night before, and they're still halfway into that 10th frame in Akron, Ohio, when they should be in the first quarter here in Los Angeles.
I mean, interested in what your work involves in a UCLA game. And what do you do?
Well, the question is, what do I do in preparation for a UCLA game? Well, it's a little easier at this point only because we've seen the team once already, so some of the work has been done. I'm kitted, and I should have brought my football spotting boards because I'm kitted by everyone as having the last of the 1920 spotting boards, but they're very large and very cumbersome, and I don't try to make things easy to pack when I go on the road. I want to have something very large. It's kind of like studying for a test, really. I don't know how they do it now, but I used to, in taking the final examination, I'd try to anticipate if I were teaching the class, what would be the questions I would ask on the final examination. So I'd kind of make out my own test, and then I'd write the answers. And it would be like writing a crib sheet. I honestly did not use them, but it was, I think it implanted in my mind more firmly what I consider to be the major concepts by writing them too. So in preparing, if you can never say it, for a football game, I have the very large board that has all the usual things everyone else has: the name of the player, the number, the height, weight, age, where he went to college. And then I like to have still room to write in whether or not he has 8 children, or whether or not he plays the harp in the off season, or whether he used to be a rodeo star, so that maybe sometime during the game that might be appropriate. I think this is one of the things that Scully does so magnificently. He has a nice, tender little tidbit, and he doesn't use it the first inning when there's a lull. He waits and saves it for hopefully that just the right time in the 7th inning, and then he calls upon it, and then it makes it so much more effective. And it's one of the techniques that I've tried to borrow. So by writing these things myself and having having a lot of room, hopefully I can get a little more into a broadcast than if I just have a nice, neat little 8.5 by 11 page with all the names and numbers on it. Some don't even do that. There are a couple of my colleagues in the National Football League who come in half hour before a football game, open up the program you buy, and there are the names and numbers, and fire away. Well, that would make me nervous. Let's see. Well, let's see. Here's the card I made out. I make out all my own. Again, they pay me well enough that I could have someone else to do it, and oftentimes that's the pattern. Here's the Oregon, pardon the expression, board I did last week. I get the name and number in red, and then the height, weight, age, year in school, and their hometown. If I can find out their major, sometimes that gives you a little insight into a player. Then any tidbits of a kid that didn't play last week. Rick Brosterhouse has a brother who is 6'9" and a fine prospect who went to the University of Texas, and we may be seeing him down the line somewhere else. He has another brother who is a fine baseball player at Oregon, so you could call upon, from a talented family thing. This kid lettered in 5 sports: baseball, basketball, football, golf, and track, which in itself is rather unusual these days. Then on the right-hand side, the same is true for UCLA, I try to keep up current statistics. I have just 3 numbers there. The top number refers to the scoring average per game, the next the field goal percentage, and below that the free throw percentage. And some will argue that we tend to fall too much upon statistics, and I think that we're guilty all of that often as well. But I think it is appropriate late in a ball game, tonight, let's say the score is tied 71, and we're 4 seconds before, no way. Huh? And Sidney Wicks is at the free throw line. I think it's important for me as a reporter to say that Sidney Wicks has hit a little less than 6 out of 10 free throws this year. Now it's almost a 50-50 chance that he's going to make it. Or that a Henry Bibby's at the line and he's made 83 out of 100. So I have as many crutches as I can get on a spotting board. So that's what I will do for both teams before the start of a broadcast. Basketball on television, I don't see any employers or sponsors here, is by far and away the easiest to do. It's like I'm in a rocking chair. You have only 10 players at a time, and they're all basically undressed, which is a great advantage. Football, you've got 22, and they all are dressed the same, and their numbers aren't always facing you, and you're at a much greater distance from the play. You have 5-5. I frankly couldn't tell you. I think if you asked me the numbers of the UCLA players, I probably couldn't tell you all their numbers because I know them by action or the physical aspect. Where in football, you have to know. You get patterns of running and so forth as you see players in the National Football League, but you really have to rely on numbers. Baseball the same. You've got a larger area to cover, and it isn't it. But basketball, it's like sitting next. I really feel like my role is to sit up there as if a fellow fan, a sports fan, my wife, who I just soon take to any sports event as anyone else because she can speak as intelligently. By the way, a former sports writer. That's might have to use her in the campaign some way. That I'm just really conversing with that person. It's just, now, hey, the way I would if I weren't on the air. What a great player. Did you see this? Or, although I do have to keep the score and time and things like that, too. And it's real, on television, it's just delightfully easy. And I wish the other work could be so. I think the fact that I've had the opportunity to talk about a team that's only lost 3 in 116 might have something to do with it, too. Yes, back there.
What's it like to work with John
Wooden
Wooden?
is, the first word that just jumps into my mind is class. After the Oregon defeat, and here's the real measure of a man. In defeat is where Coach Wooden shows his great colors. He stood down in a smelly, dark dungeon. MacArthur Court is an old building, and the dressing rooms are down in the cellar area, and there's very little lighting. He got his team. Now I'm coming down there after I signed off, so this is like 10, 15 minutes after the game was over. Players are all in the dressing room, and Coach Wooden is still outside, and he's being surrounded by, there must have been at least 25 reporters. Mean age about 20. And they're asking the most ridiculous questions in the world of the man. I mean, and obviously have been asking him for 15 minutes, and they'll continue for another 15, and he graciously is answering everyone. As never said things like, that's a stupid question, but answered. And it's real, and many, you put yourself in that position. After losing that game, the emotions of the moment, and then to go down there, and it's almost heaping a little more abuse to have to stand there and continue to answer the obvious. But he did graciously, and to me, it's a quality I don't have, and maybe that's why I admire it so much. But in defeat, this man is fantastic. I don't really admire, frankly, and I don't. Now this is totally unrelated. As I say, I admire Coach Wooden because he has this quality, but I rationalize in my own feelings that I don't want to be a good loser. I've never been one, and I'm not. I'm not going to leap over the net and shake your hand. But I think conversely here that you can be a good winner, and I despise bad winners. And I think Coach Wooden has both. He's not only a good loser, but a good winner. Yes. The divisional setup's good because it gives 4 teams a chance to win instead of 2. Basically, if no other reason than that. Heaven forbid last year. See, we finished 3rd in the American League West. Had we been in the whole big lump of American League teams, we've been battling for 10th, I think. Mercy. I'd like to have more divisions. I'd like to get it down to where you have a 50-50 chance. You and the Angels and the Padres. That'd be. Yes. Gee, my reaction, I'm only judging, as you might have, by the one television performance, but gee, they didn't seem to play much defense, and LSU typically, as we saw it, was not a good defensive team. Looked as if they had, Issel is a good player, and was it Pratt seemed to be a pretty good player, and the left-hander that they brought in seemed to be a good scorer, but they didn't show a very strong defense. And the feeling that you get from teams who have been back there and played is that a lot of them don't feel Kentucky will make it to the finals. I hope they do, because I feel UCLA will make it, and I'd like to see the top 2 teams bump heads. But I thought I would be more impressed when the game started with Kentucky. My feeling after it was all over was, gee, I hope that's who will be in the finals against UCLA. Yes.
What do you think that football fans get tired of hearing that Enberg from North Texas State or wherever?
Arkansas Tech.
Because I notice this in all of the football, statistics are a rookie or a second-year man is fine, but like after listening to Rams games for 10 years, I get sort of tired of hearing where Deacon came from. This is like 10 years removed. It seems like saying where that Ron Fairley came from some high school out in Wisconsin. I just don't see that, it should be repeated so often.
Well, if I'm guilty of that, you're right. If you're repeating it that often, that you're defeating your purpose. But amazingly, I've had a lot of mail from people who say, gee, I wish you'd tell us more often where the pro football player came from, where he went to school, because people want to identify, and there's something kind of magic about saying, here is Joe Smith. Now, Joe Smith is another one of the Smiths and another rookie who's come along, but now you say that Joe Smith is from LSU, or he's from Indiana, or from North Dakota, and now immediately you get there might be more of a chance for a reaction to identify with this guy. And I was negligent in not doing that enough, apparently, when I first started with the Rams, because I got surprisingly quite a bit of mail saying, tell us more where these guys come from. That's not going to take that much time. So if we're saying it too much, then obviously and it's bothering you, we're missing at least in one area.
Every time you introduce, like at the beginning of every game, we have the introductions. He's 6'4", he's left, plays defensive tackle. He's from Wisconsin. He's from Michigan. Like that to me, I guess just to me, it seems a little irrelevant.
Well, that's the system, though. That it's going to always be that way. That's the way we've always introduced football teams, and sometimes we're not very bright, and we figure, well, that's the way we've always done it. We'll just continue to do it that way. Maybe you need to get a group together and protest, and maybe we'll get something done. Yes.
As a sports writer, why do you think that the sports writers made UCLA second as the coaches made the first?
Because there's no question about who is better qualified to judge talent, sports writers or coaches. That's true. Sports writers and sportscasters who vote on that poll, other than the UCLA Notre Dame game, have not seen UCLA play all year. And they said, the AP poll, what they're doing is what you would do. You'd look at all the teams, you'd say, here are all the one-loss records. In other words, if you had not, we just parachuted you in here and you had not known anything about the basketball situation in the United States this year and said, here are the records of all the teams, you go ahead and pick the top 20. Without knowing anything about basketball and judging by record alone, you'd get 18 of the 20 teams. And whereas the coaches they know, they talk to other coaches, they play enough around the country that they have an idea of where the strength is. And I certainly would take, say, Tom Prothrow's judgment of who is the top football team in the country over the sports editor of the Nashville newspaper. And they both have, in this case, equal votes on their respective polls. Yes.
Broadcasting, how important is the second man, like Doggett to Scully? How does he prepare differently for the game than Scully?
I would guess it'd be tougher to be a second man. I wouldn't like that much. The second men are all very well qualified. Am I running too long now?
No, go ahead. We'll call it a week.
Okay. The sirens go off and.
Right.
Because these are all well qualified people, and most of them feel that they still should be number one too, and that can be a very uncomfortable situation.
I think actually be at a practice. I used to enjoy Doggett much more, and I've seen as Scully dominates it more, Doggett is not that good anymore.
Well, you look at Jerry Doggett. There's a 9-inning game, and he gets 2 innings of the 9, and they're separated. That's it's kind of tough to ever even get a feeling of the game. And this is not to take anything away from Vin. Vin is outstanding. Well, I don't know. Why is Dick Shadd with Chick Hearn? Chick Hearn doesn't need.
Why?
No. Now here's a case of a guy, a sweetheart of a man, Dick Shadd. I mean, really a great guy, and has a lot of talent. He perhaps. His only shortcoming was he didn't push enough to sell himself, which you have to do in any area. He had the talent, but just he's a quiet type man who He wouldn't go in and fight for what was his part. Well, this is a great opportunity for him because at least now he's identified with a major league team. But of all people to be cast with, Chick Hearn doesn't need a color man. I mean, Chick Hearn gives you all the color you'd ever want. And Dick Shad knew when he took that job that he would be reduced to nothing more than a man who gave statistical information because, you know, frankly, I do the same thing to Dave Niehaus in football. Dave has not wanted to come in that often between plays, but I hate to give up the mic. I want to be able to recap that play and set the scene for the next. And I don't want someone coming in and all you have to do, well, he's not calling, no, I don't want to use the name, but was the color man for a team in this town for a long time. And whenever the color for him consisted of, well, the sky is blue and the grass is green and it's a great day for football and back to you. And that kind of stuff, you know. And basically that's what a lot of the color commentators have become. Either that, they say that was an X-post pattern with a fly out in the Z square and the right guard pulling, and where no one understands that either. So let's see, I want to make sure, back there. The Houston game in the Astrodome? Or would you rather talk about the one in the sports arena later? That first half, I was lucky the second one, I didn't have to work and could be a fan. And that doesn't happen to me much anymore. And even when I am, I have to be kind of careful because people, you know, they look at you and say, oh yeah, he really is. But, you know, that was so exciting because it seemed the whole city of Los Angeles said, okay, Houston, you're number one. Maybe we didn't root for UCLA all year long, but just watch us now. And I think that first 20 minutes, that's the first half of that game was as exciting as any basketball game I've ever seen. And it took me about 8 minutes, and I said, you know, the hell with it. I'm getting up and I'm going to cheer too with everyone else. I was right in the middle of the press row, and I'd come, give them another one. You know, that's in the Astrodome. You know, it was a game that, again, maybe history will show perhaps that was good because it'll be much more talked about with the result as it was than had UCLA beaten them as they should have by anywhere from 10 points. I mean, they were better. UCLA obviously was the better team. Lou Alcindor was not Lou Alcindor that night, as we all know. And it was so foolish of Guy Lewis to think otherwise, and Elvin Hayes. But they learned, as we all do, I guess. But again, that was a great moment for Coach Wooden in defeat. If those of you watched on television, he waited there. We had a double commercial, and the game was over. And here I'm he said he would win or lose, he'd be there, and he stood there. And those minute commercials seemed like 5 minutes. Oh no, I hate to keep him there, but yet I had the responsibility of interviewing him afterwards. And I think he has said since that he perhaps won as many fans with that appearance and defeat as in any season of victories, and he got letters from all over the country. He won fans for UCLA by his own demeanor. Yes?
I think the Rams made a good trade trading Bruce Gossett.
I like the trade. Gossett trade for Alexander and a draft choice. They say the kid that we got from Prairie View is an Otis Taylor type end, 6'3", 215 pounds, and I think he's a great high jumper. And of course, you never know about the draft choice. I like Alexander. He'll challenge the run, I'll tell you that. Those sweeps are going to be a little different story this year. We'll have somebody who will come up and knock people down. The reason why fans perhaps in San Francisco got down on Kermit was that he was overworked. Everyone who played San Francisco threw to Kermit's side, not because he is necessarily an inferior defensive back, but because perhaps the best defensive back in pro football plays on the other side. He never gets the recognition. Jimmy Johnson, our coaches say we don't throw on that side. He's just too good, and so that gives you the other side. And so Kermit was always in the spotlight, and in a losing season, the fans were down on him. But Bruce was a fine kicker. He didn't give us many of those Stenerud cheapies, though. When we got inside the 30, we got him, but we didn't get many outside the 30. David Ray is an athlete, the man who will replace him. He'll make some tackles on a kickoff. And Gossett, very frankly, whenever we kicked off, it was 10 against 11 because Bruce wasn't inclined much to try to lower the shoulder.
We'll take one more.
One more question. Let's see here.
What do you think of Mirvich
Maravich's future as a pro ball player. I'm confused because I'd like, I examine the great talent of this kid and say, he's had to learn terrible habits for 4 years. Now, how's he going to suddenly be able to break all those when he becomes a pro? But then you talk with Coach Wooden and Coach Boyd and anyone who really knows anything about basketball, and they say he's just going to be fantastic, that he will be able to, it might take him a while, as it takes any rookie, but that he'll be a fantastic pro player, and certainly a great drawing card. You've got to love to watch him. Thank you very much. You're delightful people, and hope to see you again.